A playful song called Child. That's the end of Zusha's album Kavana. Tomorrow night, with God's help, we'll start a new album. A Guten Erev Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers. We're so excited. Shabbos is almost here. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we gather to do some beautiful learning on a Friday. Yeah? Okay, Nina's reminding me it's going to be a short class because I have to go to a Shiva call, and it actually works out beautifully because we're covering a short section of this daf. With us today, Yehudit in South Carolina, Paula in Chicago, Pauline in Arkansas, Bill in Missouri. Elam says hi, James in Indianapolis, Tom in PA, Randy in Florida, Guy in Ohio, Hannah in New York, Patrice in Utah, Lisa in Arlington, PK in Colorado, Gordo in Scotland from across the pond. Welcome, Gordo. Margot in Windsor, Ontario. PK, Shabbat Shalom, day 4 of my hip replacement, her surgery. You should have a refuah shlema, a complete healing and a completely successful surgery. And we say amen. Marjorie in Georgia, Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. As I just mentioned, I have to go to a Shiva, so we're going to be efficient today. Let's get right into it. This is the penultimate page of Tractate Rosh Hashana. This is the 9th volume of the Talmud. We're on page 34. With God's help, we'll make a siyum tomorrow night. Bring a l'chaim to make a drink bring a drink so we can make a l'chaim together. We are in chapter 4 and continuing our discussion. This is the last Mishna in the chapter, Mishna number 10. Confirming that. Pretty sure. Yeah, this is the last Mishnah in the chapter. Okay, we're actually going to skip quite a bit on the A side of page 34. This is continuing the derivation and sources by our sages of basically why the sounds, the blast of the shofar on Rosh Hashana is, that order, that familiar order, Tekia-Teruah-Tekia, or Tekia-Shevarim-Tekia. And today we'll see sometimes you say Tekia-Shevarim-Terua-Tekia. So that's the longest blast, and that one sounds like this. So that had 4 components. Tekia, Shevarim, the then the Teruah, and then Tekia. And the sages derived at length why you always have to have a Tekia before and after a Teruah, or before and after a Shevarim. And they derive why a Shevarim is a Shevarim and why a Teruah is a Teruah. And we really did that yesterday as well, and they just went deeper into the sources in the beginning of today's page. So we pick it up toward the bottom of the A side of page 34. where the Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of the Tana who derives the law that each teruah of Rosh Hashana must be preceded by a tekiah, from the verse in the Torah which describes or commands the sounding of the shofar in the wilderness at the time of the gathering of the assembly, right? So they used the trumpets and in some cases the shofar to communicate to the vast encampment of the children of Israel in the wilderness after the exodus from Egypt, 2 million Jews wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. How do you communicate without a PA system? It was the trumpets and the shofars that told people various signals throughout the encampment. And so we derive from those blasts that were used in the wilderness certain laws about the blasts of Rosh Hashana. So according to this Tana, who derives the law that each teruah of Rosh Hashana should be preceded by a tekiah, and he derives that from the sounding of the shofar in the wilderness at the time of the gathering of the assembly. According to that Tana, one could argue as follows: if so, just as there in the wilderness there was a sounding of trumpets, so too here on Rosh Hashana there must be sounding of trumpets. If we're going to derive laws about the length and type of blasts of the shofar on Rosh Hashana from the blasts that were in the wilderness, but in the wilderness they used trumpets, right? The silver trumpets. So why, if we're going to use, learn something from those laws in the wilderness, perhaps we should also be learning that on Rosh Hashana, in addition to blasting the shofar, we should also blast the trumpets. And there were trumpets in the Holy Temple, as we read earlier. The trumpets in the Holy Temple were used when public fasts were decreed and to signal that the public fast had begun and ended. So why don't we have the blasting of the trumpets on Rosh Hashana? Therefore, the verse in the Torah states, sound the shofar, or it's not in the Tanakh, right, in the Bible, not in the 5 books of Moses, but rather in Psalms, in Psalm 81:4, the verse states, sound the shofar at the new moon, at the full moon for our feast day. That's Psalm 81:4. Now, full moon festivals are Passover and Sukkot. Those land on the full moon in the middle of the lunar month. But which is the festival on which the month, i.e. the moon, is covered, right? Which festival occurs when there's a new moon in the sky, right? Not a full moon, not a half moon, not a crescent moon, but no moon. Which is the festival that occurs on the new moon? There's only one, Rosh Hashana. You must say that this is Rosh Hashana, the only festival that coincides with the new moon, which cannot be seen. And the Merciful One states, sound the shofar at the new moon, which indicates that on Rosh Hashana, one sounds a shofar, period, and nothing else. Rabbi Abahu instituted in Caesarea the following order, right? And it's in Hebrew, it's spelled Kesari. Right, so we call it Caesarea. Some people look at that and they say, well, it's spelled like Caesar with an EA at the end. And so some people say Caesarea or Caesarea. But I think it's better to say Caesarea, and that's what they say in Israel, as I understand it. And I've been there a few times. In fact, I thought about wearing my golf hat from Caesarea. There's only one golf course in Israel, and it's in Caesarea. It's a coastal city north of Tel Aviv. I bought it when I was there in 2019, hoping, imagining that I would come back to that golf course on the Maccabiah team, the USA Maccabiah golf team, which I shared here before. I didn't make the team as a golfer, but I was invited to be the coach. And so I'm going back as the coach. And so I had credibility as a coach. I've really been, continued to work on my game, and it's gotten a lot more respectable. So I'll have some credibility with the players. And of course, my real intent, and as I mentioned to the head of Maccabi, and I've mentioned here, I really want to get an opportunity to address the whole U.S. delegation, 800 athletes, many of whom are completely unconnected to the Jewish tradition and to Jewish learning and Torah and what we're doing here. As I was, I was pretty unconnected when I went as a 20-year-old in 1985 as a Maccabi athlete and as a rower back then. And, I had an amazing experience in Israel, but it took another 10 years before I really reconnected with the Masorah, with the tradition. And I would like to give a talk telling people about my story, my life, and why I think they should, give Judaism, give scripture, give Torah a try. It's not old-fashioned. It's not out of date. So hopefully I will have that opportunity. I've been talking, with the leadership at Maccabi about giving that talk. Okay, so that's Caesarea, right? So that's Caesarea. And Rabbi Abahu instituted in Caesarea the following order of sounding the shofar. All right, so right away, your antenna should go up a little bit. Well, wait a minute. Rabbi Abahu, I'm not even sure right now if he's a Tana. He might well be an Amora, right? Rabbi Abahu, he's quite late. Okay, so I think Rabbi Abahu is living and teaching in Caesarea after the Second Temple has been destroyed, and maybe even after the Mishna was compiled, which is in the year 200. And now he's instituting the following order of sounding the shofar: first a tekiah, then 3 shevarim, and then a teruah, and then another tekiah. And your antenna should go up because why is Rabbi Abahu instituting what the order of the blasts is at such a late stage in Jewish history? Like, didn't they know what the order of the shofar blast was, like, much earlier than that? Didn't Moses teach the people in the wilderness? And weren't we blowing the shofar every year since then? Why would there need to be a new decree instituted that's going to affect how the shofar is blown on Rosh Hashana? It's an amazing question, right? So we're going to have an answer for that momentarily. Okay, so what Rabbi Abahu instituted in Caesarea is this what I blew at the beginning of the show, right? Already we've talked about, and the sages have derived why it goes Tekia, Teruah-Tekia, or Tekia-Shevarim-Tekia, or Tekia Gedola by itself. That's what we do on Yom Kippur. But the great Tekia, very long Tekia. But why Tekia-Shevarim-Terua-Tekia? Why was that instituted, and why hadn't it been instituted earlier? And the Gemara asks, whichever way you look at it, this is difficult. If, according to the opinion of Rabbi Abahu, the sound that the Torah calls a teruah is a whimpering, i.e. short consecutive sounds, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, one should perform Tekia, Teruah, Tekia. And if Rabbi Abahu holds that a teruah is actually a moaning, the longer broken sounds, what we call a shevarim, da, da, da. So if he holds that a teruah is actually that sound, what we call a shevarim, okay, so he should sound the set as follows: Tekia, 3 shevarim, and then another tekia. Why would he include both the teruah and the shevarim between 2 tekiyas? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Abahu was uncertain whether a teruah means moaning or whimpering, right? Da 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 da, or da 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 da. He wasn't sure what teruah means, and he therefore instituted that both types of sounds should be included in the same blast, the same set, to ensure that one fulfills his obligation. Now, Rav Avira strongly objects to this, but perhaps a teruah is the whimpering, da 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 da, and the addition of 3 shevarim interrupts between the teruah and the initial tekiah, which would disqualify the entire set. And the Gemara answers, that is why one then performs a tekiah, teruah, tekiah set to account for this possibility. Ravina strongly objects to this, but perhaps a teruah is a moaning, da da da, and the teruah interrupts between the shevarim and the final tekiah, once again disqualifying the entire set. And the Gemara likewise answers, that is why one then performs a Tekia-Shevarim-Tekia set to cover this possibility as well. And the Gemara asks, But if in any case one must perform the 2 sets of blasts, for what purpose did Rabbi Abahu institute that one should perform the Tekia-Shevarim-Terua-Tekia set? If you're going to do Tekia-Shevarim-Tekia as a set, and you're going to do Tekia-Teruah-Tekia, so then all possibilities are covered. Why do we also need the Tekia-Shevarim-Terua-Tekia set? If a teruah is moaning, one already did it. If it is whimpering, one already did this too. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Abahu was uncertain, and he thought that perhaps a teruah consists of moaning followed by whimpering. Consequently, all 3 sets are necessary. Since you're not sure what the Torah means when it says teruah, it might mean ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. It might mean ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. And it might mean da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And so we've got all those 3 possibilities covered. And the Gemara asks, if so, let one perform the opposite set as well. Tekia-Teruah-Shevarim. Maybe there should also be a Teruah-Shevarim in the middle. The Tekia, da, and then da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Right? The short bursts and then the 3 and then go back to another tekiah. Why is it the 3, the shevarim, and then the teruah only in that order? Why not the reverse? And the Gemara answers, the normal way of things is that when a person experiences a bad event, he first moans, and then he whimpers, but not the reverse. And that's why we do it this way. And this is the way we've done it until this time. So here's the law and a note and some background on Rabbi Abahu and Caesarea. So what is the law? All communities follow the opinion of Rabbi Abahu. Repeat. All communities follow the opinion of Rabbi Abahu. This means that in addition to the Tekia-Shevarim-Tekia set of blasts and the Tekia-Teruah-Tekia set of blasts, they also sound a Tekia-Shevarim-Terua-Tekia set of blasts. And the usual order is the Tekia-Shevarim-Terua-Tekia, then Tekia-Shevarim-Tekia, and then Tekia-Teruah-Tekia. There are many different customs with regard to the placement of these sets. The sets happen in that manner and in that order, but where you place them in the Rosh Hashana liturgy, that varies a little bit. Are you doing Nusach Sfard, Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sephardi, Nusach Arizal? So there's different traditions of the little nuances in the prayers. The basics are all the same. Little nuances are different. And according to those nuances, you might place those blasts of the shofar slightly different places in the prayers of Rosh Hashana. But those are the blasts that all communities do on Rosh Hashana. Usually 3 entire cycles of each set are sounded before the Musaf Amira, before the additional prayer. And in the additional prayer, 1 set of each is sounded after each of the blessings of kingship, remembrances, and shofarot. Some early authorities maintain that one must sound the Shevarim-Terua blast set in 1 breath. Others have the custom to break in between the 2 sounds every time, and yet others suggest the compromise of sounding them once with a break and once without. A note about Rabbi Abahu who instituted in Caesarea. The early authorities are puzzled by the fact that Rabbi Abahu passed this ordinance, as it is strange that there was no tradition for a ritual conducted every single year by the entire Jewish people. Why was it necessary so late in Jewish history for Rabbi Abahu to issue this decree? And several explanations have been suggested. Some maintain that there was indeed a doubt in this regard, as the long exile caused the tradition of the Torah to be lost in certain areas, and therefore they did not know whether the teruah in the Torah meant wailing or moaning. That's hard to believe, because even if certain areas in certain regions of the Jewish people, things were lost. There's plenty of, areas where there was a continuous tradition all the way back to Mount Sinai. Others contend that by Torah law, any broken sound is a teruah, and one may fulfill the Torah obligation with either a shavarim or a teruah. However, over the course of the generations, different customs developed. That is so easy to understand and believe, right? In different areas, slight differences, slight nuances in the tradition developed over time. And some would always perform a shavarim, while others would invariably sound teruah. Due to Rabbi Abahu's concern that ignorant people would mistakenly think that these divergent customs were based on a fundamental dispute, he instituted that the customs be combined. Yet others say that there was also a third custom, to sound both shavarim and teruah together. Alternatively, the sound of the teruah should ideally express both anguish and fear. As different generations interpret sounds in their own way, various customs develop with regard to the most suitable way to achieve this sound for the teruah. It's in the same way that, if you ask an English speaker in America, what sound does a rooster make? They'll be like, cock-a-doodle-doo. And if you ask a European, what sound does a rooster make? They'd be like, cocorico, something like that, right? Or they express it differently. They don't say cock-a-doodle-doo. And they're talking about the same sound from the bird, but they just, they express differently because the language is different. Likewise, what is the emotional impact of da da versus da 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 da? Could have a different meaning, kind of just in terms of emotional impact in different regions, and that might be part of the reason for the divergent customs. And Rabbi Abahu wanted to, establish that it would be the same shofar blast throughout the Jewish world. His word went out from Caesarea, and he was successful. All communities follow Rabbi Abahu. Just a note on Caesarea. Caesarea was a coastal settlement originally founded in the 4th century before the Common Era. In 30 BCE, King Herod developed the site and called it Caesarea. At the beginning of the Common Era, in the year 6, the Romans established Caesarea as the administrative capital of the land of Israel. Originally, most of Caesarea's residents were non-Jews. Even later on, when its Jewish community expanded and became more established, the town remained essentially Gentile. Nevertheless, it was the home of important Torah scholars, particularly after the Bar Kokhba revolt, and it had its own yeshiva. The list of noteworthy Tanaim, rabbis of the Mishna, who lived in Caesarea includes 2 disciples of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, so disciples of Rebbe, who edited and published the Mishnah. And what were their names? Bar Kapara and Rabbi Oshaya. Rabbi Oshaya Rabbah. Important Amoraim, so rabbis of the Gemara, rabbis who came after the Mishnah was published, also lived there. Among them, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, Rabbi Abahu and his son. So there we go. Rabbi Abahu's an Amora. Rabbi Hanina Bar Papa, Rabbi Yitzhak ben Elazar, Rabbi Chizkiah, and a large part of the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, is a record of the discussions of the rabbis in Caesarea. Rabbi Yochanan said, and now we're on the B side of page 34, if the requisite 9 shofar blasts at 9 different times of the, Rabbi Yochanan said, if the requisite 9 shofar blasts are heard at 9 different times of the day, the one who listens to them has fulfilled his obligation. In other words, you have to hear all those different sets, right? You have to hear 100 shofar blasts that day. And each one is a set, right? Where you get 9 blasts in each set, and there's 11 sets, etc. Now, if you heard them at different times of the day, not just during the morning services, as it were, did you fulfill your obligation? Rabbi Yochanan says, yes. This is also taught in a Baraisa. If one heard 9 shofar blasts at 9 different times of the day, he has fulfilled his obligation. If one heard the blasts from 9 different people simultaneously, he has not fulfilled his obligation. If one heard a Tekia from this one and afterwards he heard a Teruah from this other one, he has fulfilled his obligation, as one does not have to hear all the blasts from the same shofar blower. And this is true even if one heard the blasts from different individuals at intervals, and even if it took the course of the entire day. The Gemara asks, and did Rabbi Yochanan actually say this? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yechotzadak during the reading of Hallel, which we don't do on Rosh Hashana, but we do on other festivals, and Rosh Chodesh, and Hanukkah, during the reading of Hallel, or the Megillah of Esther, meaning on Purim, if one paused long enough to complete all of it, he must return to the beginning, as it must be read in one session. If the Hallel of festivals or the Megillah being read on Purim, if you interrupt it long enough that you could have finished it in the meantime, therefore you have to go back to the beginning and start over because it's considered too much of an interruption. If so with Hallel and the Megillah, why not with the shofar blasts of Rosh Hashana? Why do we not say that you should hear them all in one session? And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult, la kasha, as this ruling with regard to the shofar is his own opinion. And that case of Hallel and the Megillah is his teacher's opinion. It is Rabbi Shimon ben Yochanan who holds that one may not pause in the middle of sounding the shofar. And the Gemara asks, and is this not also his own opinion as well? Wasn't Rabbi Abahu once walking after Rabbi Yochanan? And Rabbi Abahu was reciting Shema as he walked. Now, most of us don't do that, right? The Torah actually says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your resources. And these words which I command you on this day shall be in your heart. You shall teach them to your children. Speaking of them, when you're sitting in your house, when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. So normally we do it when we lie down and when we rise up, in the evening and in the morning, right? But we don't think so much about when we're sitting in our house and when we walk by the way, right? So you should say, in other words, that these words would always be on our lips. Okay, well, Rabbi Abahu was doing it. He was reciting Shema while walking. So wasn't Rabbi Abahu once walking after Rabbi Yochanan? And Rabbi Abahu was reciting Shema as he walked. And when he reached alleyways that were filthy with human excrement, oy vey, people were just dropping human excrement in the alleys of those ancient cities. Aren't you glad you live in a time with modern plumbing? But when he would pass such an alley, he would stop reciting the Shema because it is prohibited to utter words of Torah in the presence of filth. So he would fall silent and stop reciting Shema. After he passed through, Rabbi Abahu said to Rabbi Yochanan, what is the law with regard to completing Shema from where I left off? And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, if you remained in the alleyway for an interval sufficient to complete the entire Shema, if you paused long enough that you could have completed the Shema in that amount of time that you paused, then you should return to the beginning and start again. And this shows that Rabbi Yochanan himself holds that if one takes an extended break, you should start again from the beginning. And the Gemara answers, this is no proof, as it is possible that this is what Rabbi Yochanan said. I myself do not hold that one must start again after a long pause. However, according to you, as you hold that a delay is a problem, the law is that if you paused for an interval sufficient to complete the entire Shema, you should return to the beginning. What is the law? If one was reciting Shema and he came upon a place filthy with human excrement, he must stop. And when he leaves this place, even if he paused as long as it takes to recite the entire Shema, he may continue from where he left off, as the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. And some say that if he paused in this manner, he should return to the beginning, and this is the correct practice. So here's a case where the law is according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's more lenient. Even if you took an extended pause, you can pick up where you left off. But we're being told, according to Shulchan Aruch, that the correct practice is more according to the custom, and that is if you're reciting Shema, you're interrupted, and it's an extended break where you could have finished it, then you should, in fact, go back and start from the beginning. The sages taught in a baraisa The various trumpet blasts on a fast day do not invalidate one another, i.e., if one was omitted, that does not invalidate the other blasts. Similarly, the additional blessings that are inserted into the Amidah prayer on a fast day do not invalidate one another. However, the shofar blasts and the additional blessings of Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur do invalidate one another, meaning if you left some out, you have to start over. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason that all the blasts and blessings are indispensable on Rosh Hashana? Rabbah said, I'm sorry, not that you have to start over, but if you left any out, you didn't fulfill your obligation. And Rabbah said that the Holy One, blessed be He, said, recite before me on Rosh Hashana kingship, remembrances, and shofarot. Kingship so that you will crown me as king over you. Remembrances so that your remembrances will rise before me for good, before God for good. And with what? With the shofar. Since these blessings constitute a single unit, one who did not recite them all has not fulfilled his obligation. What is the law? The blasts and the blessings of Rosh Hashanah are indispensable to one another. And therefore, if one cannot say them all, he should say none of them. It would be like a blessing in vain. If you can't complete the blessings of Rosh Hashanah, don't say any of them. Some say that the blessings of kingship, remembrance, and shofarot must be said in order, and one who says them out of order does not fulfill his obligation, while others disagree. On other days of the year, the blessings of the Amidah are not indispensable, and one recites the blessings he knows. In other words, if you're only able to recite some of the blessings without reciting all of them, you should go ahead and recite those blessings on every other day of the year. But on Rosh Hashanah, you have to recite all of them, and if you can't do all of them, some of them, it's like doing a blessing in vain. One praying alone on Rosh Hashanah should not stop to sound the shofar during the blessings, even if he has someone to sound it for him. Rather, the shofar should be sounded on his behalf before he recites the additional prayer, and there is no need to sound it for him again. And this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rava. An individual who did not sound the shofar or pray. I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. One can sound the shofar on behalf of another person. If there are no additional people present, however, if one did not pray, someone else cannot fulfill his obligation for him unless there is a quorum of 10 men present. So what that means is, if a person is not skilled enough to pray on their own, they can't read it, they're for some reason unable to do it, they can follow a prayer leader and just listen and say Amen. But a prayer leader who is deputized, right, who is appointed an agent to pray for others, can only do so with a minyan present, with at least 10 Jewish men present. Otherwise, he's not deputized to pray for another person. Some say that if this individual is unable to pray, his friend may fulfill his obligation on his behalf even without the presence of a minyan, and one may rely on this opinion in exigent circumstances, right? So if you've got a situation, somebody is ill, you're not going to get a minyan to his hotel, to his hospital room, but there's one person present, and he could just listen to the one person praying and say amen, etc. That works in that circumstance, but generally you don't want to do it that way. And finally, if one has to choose between hearing the shofar and reciting the blessings on Rosh Hashanah, obviously you need to do both. But if for some reason you have to choose, the mitzvah to be among those who sound the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is more important than the mitzvah to be among those who recite the blessings. How so? If there are two towns, and in one there are those who know how to sound the shofar, and in the other there are individuals who know how to recite the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah, the blessings of Rosh Hashanah, the prayers of Rosh Hashanah, one should go to the place where they know how to sound the shofar. And one does not go to the place where they know how to recite the blessings, because hearing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is actually more important than the prayers. And the Gemara asks, this law is obvious. Sounding the shofar is a mitzvah by Torah law, whereas the additional prayers of Rosh Hashanah apply by rabbinic law. And a mitzvah that applies by Torah law is clearly more important. And the Gemara answers, no. This seemingly superfluous ruling is necessary to teach that although in this town it is certain that the additional prayer will be recited, and in this other town it is uncertain whether or not the shofar will be sounded, one should still go to the place where they know how to sound the shofar rather than the location where they only know how to recite the blessings, and for sure you will not hear the shofar. That's what I've got today. Nina's reminding me, keep the answer brief because I've got to get to the Shiva. Sharon, so why is Rosh Hashanah called Yom Teruah versus the other blast names? I don't know. Sharon, so according to the Mishnah, those who arrive late or leave early, most congregants, then their blessings are in vain. I mean, I was thinking the same thing as I was reading this. It's a really big deal. According to this teaching, don't be late. Now, it might not matter so much that they come late, right? Because what we're talking about is the kingship remembrances and shofarot. Those additional prayers, additional blessings that are added only on Rosh Hashanah to the Rosh Hashanah liturgy. So if you come late, you're probably just missing, Pesukah de Zimre, like the parts of the service that are standard in daily prayers and Shabbos and festival prayers, but not particular to Rosh Hashanah. Probably not going to come so late that you miss that. Leave early, big problem. Big problem. You heard it here, folks. Make sure you don't come in late or leave early on the Musaf Amida of Rosh Hashanah. That would create a problem. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos. It's going to be much earlier than last week now that we've had the clocks change. And we'll make a siyum on the final page, a short page, page 35 here, Tractate Rosh Hashanah. Have a celebration, read the Hadran, and then we'll open just the first line of the next volume of the Talmud, which is Tanis, the laws of the public fasts that were decreed in ancient times. Very interesting volume of the Talmud. Very interesting tractate. Has a lot of cool digressions in it. Good Shabbos.